what the government is doing with this law is they're going to take away our access to like records held by ministers and the premier's office, which is a big blow to transparency.
Back on Closer Look on this Friday. Love Fridays.
Yes, let's go.
Yes. Baseball season. The snow is melting slowly but surely.
Yeah, right. I don't see it.
Yeah. No, I'm excited. Baseball, Dan Shulman yesterday, great interview. It's funny, I was watching some of the clips from the World Series this morning and listening to Dan call the plays. And then watching the interview again, it's kind of cool, the people that we get to have conversations with.
Yeah, it was great. I thought the same thing, and he's as nice of a guy as I thought he was going to be. Because again, if you listen to his story, the guy started from nothing. He was doing radio at the University of Western Ontario. Got a job, I think, in Barrie and Collingwood. He's working for the radio station, and you don't forget that, right? You had to work your way up. People had to give you a couple breaks. You had to be a good person, obviously, and he did that. But I do regret that we didn't get him to read the phone book. I think it just would have been fun to be like, okay, we're on the bees.
That's right. Next time.
Yeah, no, but he was excellent. And I think it's amazing too what he talked about, how the pressure, he doesn't really feel it, right? Yeah. Like, and I don't know, we didn't ask this, but imagine you're at the Rogers Center in Game 6, Game 7, but the place is rocking, just like filled to the brim.
Yep.
People are going crazy, and he's in that booth doing his thing, and how you don't feel like that pressure. Is pretty amazing, but I guess that's what makes him so good at what he does.
He is good, and it's a real art to know as a commentator when to speak, and more importantly, when not to
when
speak.
To shut up. Yeah, that's right.
And he is just an absolute master at it.
Yeah, it was great. Great conversation. Really enjoyed it.
All right, big news yesterday at the Ledge.
Yeah,
budget.
We should have asked Dan about the budget.
That's right.
Well, he was a math major. We should have had Dan to come on, but we have even better. We have Jessica Smith-Cross coming on today. She's our editor-in-chief of the Trillium.
Yeah.
Her and her team, and with some help from some of our locals that went out there to Queen's Park. Taylor Payson, Santana, Bell, and Tony from Guelph today. We're seconded to the great team at Queen's Park, helped in their reporting on what is a very busy day, budget day. Their coverage was fantastic. It ran on their site, obviously, and across our chain. If you haven't checked it out, it's the comprehensive stuff you're going to find. And Jess is a master at explaining so many different details, and it's why she gets asked not to just come on this podcast, but she's all over the place.
Yes, she is.
You'll find her everywhere. So we're looking forward to chatting with her about what's really behind the numbers.
Ontario Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy unveiled the province's budget yesterday, pitching it as a plan to protect jobs, grow the economy, and brace for an uncertain future. Behind the headlines and the billions of dollars, what's actually new here and what's just political framing? From deficits and debt to transit, housing, and healthcare, this budget touches just about every corner of life in Ontario. The question is, does it meaningfully change anything for you? Joining us now to break it all down from Toronto is Jessica Smith-Cross, our editor-in-chief at our Queen's Park Bureau, the Trillium. Jess, welcome back to the show. Always good to see you.
Thanks for having me on. I love doing this.
Well, we love that you love doing it. All right, Jess, let's start with the big picture numbers. The budget, $244 billion, a record amount, but it also comes with a higher than expected deficit at $13.8 billion. Can you kind of walk us through that? How is the Ford government selling these dollar figures to the public?
So one thing that we found interesting about this is they've been promising to balance the budget for a long time, since coming into office. And every year they have what they call a path to balance. Like, okay, in a few years, we're going to balance the budget. And then that balance day, the year in which they say, here's when we're going to have a little surplus, gets moved back a year. And so that's happened again. We've got a $13 billion deficit this time, and the budget balance date has been moved back again. So when you see the projections and all of the stuff in the budget, you always have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. These are projections, things that are based on what the economic circumstances are and what they expect them to be for the next year, because that matters a lot to like how much revenue the government has. And it's also doesn't take into account every decision that they're going to make during the year. It's their best effort, but the number you get in the spring is not usually the number you end up with by the end of the year. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But overall, what we learned, and what I learned the most from having an economist sitting with me in the office on budget day, we had the province's former chief economist, Brian Lewis, sitting with us, and he broke it down in a nice column for it. And he basically said that he talked about this pattern that the government has as pushing back its balance, and kind of criticized him a little bit for not being straightforward about what needs to be done to get to balance, and not yet doing those things yet. The promised restraint in spending that they've said they need to do to get to balance hasn't quite happened over the years. They have money to spend. The economy wasn't as bad last year as everyone expected it to be because of the tariffs. They didn't have actually as big a global hit as the forecasters expected. So this deficit comes despite having more wiggle room than they could have had.
It's a great point because I think revenue was almost $7 billion higher than they expected. Yet the deficit still went up. And that's kind of the balancing act. And Brian's column was great. But can you speak a bit more to that, Jess? I think people expected, because it wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be with the tariffs, that we wouldn't have such a high deficit.
Yeah, and I don't want to minimize that. And that's one of the things when the civil servants briefed us, they said, the hit from tariffs wasn't as hard as we expected, without wanting to minimize the local pain. Like, I'm sure a lot of the readers in Sault Ste. Marie are going to hear like, oh, the tariffs weren't as bad as they thought. Look at my job, or it's not that not to say specific local impacts that are bad didn't happen. But yeah, the budget is always that balancing act. They have money to spend. How are they going to spend it? How much do they end up having at the end of the year after everything's all said and done?
The other thing, the figure that sticks out for me, and I've talked about this, and I'm not an expert at this at all, but with that deficit now would bring the overall provincial debt to about $485 billion. And just 8 years ago, in 2018, it was around $337 billion. That's a huge jump, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger. Can you speak to the ramification? I think I read somewhere that the interest alone that we're paying now every year on that is actually the same we're paying on post-secondary education. I could be wrong with that, but it's like $16 billion just in interest payments. There's got to be eventually where we can't keep doing this, right, Jess? Or is that fair to say?
It really depends on who you talk to. And I'm not when I talk to them, some would frame this as absolutely manageable, not a risk for the province of Ontario. There's no reason that we can't keep this up. The economy grows. What matters is the size of the debt relative to the size of the economy, and the economy should hopefully keep growing so that it doesn't become an unmanageable problem. But some people are much more hawkish and concerned and do think that this is a serious problem that needs tackling. The Minister of Finance for the province of Ontario is one of those people. He was very clear when he came into politics that this was his mission, was to right Ontario's fiscal ship, and he was going to be the guy to do it.
Jess, the government is accused of both spending too much and also for spending too little on things like healthcare and education. Can you speak to that a bit for us?
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be hard to be in government, right? You're going to get it from all sides all the time. But that is actually a consistent criticism. So you'll have the same people in some cases make both of those criticisms, that the deficit, the debt is too high. The spending is overall too high, but the spending on the things that people really need is too low. So I'll take those like one at a time. On healthcare, we had some pretty strong words from the Ontario Hospital Association going into the budget, saying that there's $1 billion structural deficit in the hospital funding. This is because the pressures on the hospital system are growing at like a 6% a year rate. People are getting older and needing more healthcare. Things are getting more expensive. All of that. But the government funding has only increased by 4% a year. And so they only got their 4% this year again. The government's saying we're spending more on healthcare than we absolutely ever have. They've got to spend it right. All of those things are true. You get similar concerns from the education sector that class sizes are too high, school boards are strapped. That the government's funding has not kept up with inflation, and the government will say we're spending records amount on education, and education advocates are saying it's still not enough. And then you have people who are the more fiscally conservatives warning that this conservative government is having too many deficits and too much debt, because they're of belief that it is heading towards somewhere that could be problematic or unsustainable, or at least wasteful in how much you have to spend on interest payments. So they are getting it from all sides. You do get the criticism from people who try to make both arguments at once, that they're both spending too much and too little, is that they're spending too little on the things that matter and too much on the things like moving the science center or sort of unnecessary things. That's a harder line to walk. And I would say to that criticism that all the frills that you want in that budget probably definitely do not equal a healthcare budget, but it could make a dent.
Just specifically on the healthcare budget, like you mentioned the hospitals and they're advocating for so much more funding. How much more did they get, and are they happy with it, or what's been their reaction to it?
I haven't seen a reaction statement out yet. I know that it was a 4% increase rather than the 6% they say necessary. Though how they would phrase that and what they'll say has yet to be determined. Yeah,
it'd be interesting to see that. Is it a fair question to ask who the big loser is in this budget? Is there one organization or one sector that was fighting for something and is really unhappy with how this went? Or on the opposite, is there a big winner in the budget?
That's a little tough. I think maybe education unions might see themselves as the big loser. I wouldn't want to put words into their mouths, but I don't think they're happy. And the increase there was like a 0.6% increase, right? Which is pretty slim. And they've been warning that it's not great. And the sector is really unhappy for a number of reasons. The education minister keeps musing about reform in terms of maybe eliminating trustees partially or somewhat, or changing their roles. And he's taken over a whole bunch of school boards. And then the teacher negotiations are coming in to start. So that is an area of discontent that we're going to hear a lot more about going forward. I don't know about winners. There was a little bit of extra autism funding that advocates say is very important, but I don't think it's enough for what they say they needed. Home buyers, people who are interested in buying new build homes. This was announced before the budget, but it's part of the budget. You're going to get the HST off a home if it's up to $1 million home, and if it phases out. But for up to $1.85 million, to still get $130,000 off. That is meant to spur the building of new homes, to sort of fix the market so that developers will start building again and be able to sell the homes that they build to people. Because right now, prices and incomes are at this disconnect where people can't afford to buy homes that are being built, so nobody's building them, which then drives up the price of housing. It's a pretty bad circle.
Some other numbers here, Jess. Infrastructure spending set to rise by 14% from $32.3 billion this fiscal year to $36.7 in 2627. Transit, provincial highways, and hospitals will each see their infrastructure spending jump by about $1 billion. What else can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there wasn't any huge new infrastructure announcements in the budget, but this government has made it a mission to build and is building a lot of things. So on transit, the Ontario line is underway in Toronto. It's actually right next door from my house where we're recording this. They're hard at work.
Look out! Let's check it out. I'll go look out the window.
Yeah. A lot of trucks. And there's progress on the various highway projects, the Bradford bypass and the 413. And there's even going to be an update on the tunnel. It's still in the feasibility study stage, so no one's building a tunnel yet. But there will be field work associated with the feasibility study starting this spring, we learned in the budget.
One of my favorite topics. We're going to definitely have you on again to talk about that, Jess. Tell us about this Protect Ontario Account Investment Fund. This is fascinating to me. I don't think the vast majority of Ontarians have any idea what it is.
Well, it's new, right? This is brand new. And even when the government and the civil servants were explaining it, they've cast it as a new way of doing things. The most similar thing we have in Ontario already is the Building Ontario Fund, but this is a little bit different. I'll try my best to explain it in layperson terms, but mostly because I am a layperson. So here goes. There's $4 billion that the government had earmarked as part of this Protect Ontario account in the last budget, that this is how they're saying they're going to spend it. They've gone quietly out to the market, to the private sector, to find a manager, an investment fund manager from the private sector to invest this money on behalf of the province, and test Ontarians' money on behalf of Ontarians into emerging sectors that the province then believes are going to be important to building the economy. They listed like critical minerals, defense, like biotech, stuff like that. AI's in there as well. As a way to help boost the economy and presumably get some kind of return on investment for Ontarians. We don't know everything yet. So they're going out to these private sector potential partners. We don't know who. I asked for information about like, what do you, if you put in this like tender, this request for proposal, what's out there? They won't say. We don't know yet what kind of rules or guardrails there are going to be around it. The finance minister promised there will be guardrails, but not what they will be. There will be some kind of arm's length board, it looks like. On one hand, it does seem like it seems aimed at making the economy stronger, making it better so that they can afford to pay for healthcare for this growing and aging population and everything that it needs. And it's targeted at the kind of economic problem I have heard economists talk about is an issue in Canada. But, best laid plans, who knows? I don't know if we'll be here in 5 years saying that this was a brilliant stroke or if this will be another boondoggle, because I don't know.
Well, we'll check on it in 5 years. We'll play this clip.
We absolutely will. Jess, there's a kind of a mysterious Sky Dome legislation change that's going to allow a parking lot to be developed. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always the Sky Dome in my heart. It was when this bill was passed, when it was made. So there's this area near the dome with some parking, and I think it's for buses. That's provincially owned land, and that's written in legislation. So they're going to have to pass legislation to open it up to some kind of development, and we don't know what yet. The premier's had a lot of big, grand ideas for changing Toronto, and we don't know what is in mind here. They haven't said yet.
All right. Speaking of grand ideas, one that we're very much against in the budget bill are the changes to the FOI legislation that we're all very concerned about here. Was it actually mentioned in the budget?
Very much in passing. There's like a reference to modernizing it.
That's it. None of the detail, just that we're going to modernize it. Okay. And so what's the timeline on that? Well, maybe just remind our listeners just what the changes are and how it's going to impact what so many people do with FOI legislation.
Yeah, I'll try not to get too worked up about it. This is
Go ahead. You can get as worked up as you want. That's fine.
This one affects me personally and journalists personally. So here goes. So when we are looking for information from this government, a lot of times we can't just get it by asking. We're told we have to submit a Freedom of Information request. And when we're investigating this government, because I've got some great investigative journalists on my teams, we need to get information through FOI. It means you submit a request to a government body and you describe the information that you're looking for, and they're supposed to give it to you. They can charge you money to do it, and there are a lot of exceptions laid out in a law that tells you what information you can't get. So people's personal information, health information, information that would, harm a commercial deal, information that would compromise national security or police investigation. There's like the list. This goes on. Information that would disclose the cabinet deliberations. It's called cabinet confidence. The premier and his ministers are allowed to talk in confidence about how to run this province, and we don't get to know what they thought before they made the decision so that they can say their piece freely, which makes sense. But what the government is doing with this law is they're going to take away our access to records held by ministers and the premier's office, which is a big blow to transparency. We use this tool to get the calendars of ministers and the premiers to find out what kind of lobbyists and other folks they're meeting with, so we know what they're doing, because they don't disclose that publicly. At the federal government, if a lobbyist meets with the politician, they have to publicly report it. They don't in Ontario. The premier doesn't tell us where he is on any given day, and publishing schedules used to be routine. We also look for emails and communications between political staffers so we can get a sense of the political calculations that go into the things that the government does, so we can tell everybody maybe why they're doing what they're doing and what voters might want to know when they're making their choice in the next election. So they are taking this away. The Information and Privacy Commissioner who oversees this regime appears to be livid, quite outspoken about how harmful this is to trust in government, to transparency, to a functioning democracy. But these changes are written in the budget bill. We have heard some indications that they're going to speed through the budget bill very quickly, perhaps skipping committee as they have before and passing it as soon as possible. The consequences for Ontario politics are pretty severe. There are a couple of really big FOI court cases, and we have some big FOIs that look like they're going to be ended.
Yes.
The Global News has looked for the Premier's cell phone records on government business only to figure out what government business he's been conducting on his phone during a certain period of time. The guy who was in the middle of the Greenbelt scandal, working for the housing minister, his chief of staff is in a court fight with the Integrity Commissioner about protecting government records about the Greenbelt that he's apparently kept in his personal Gmail account, which is a no-no. She's asked him to turn them over. He's refusing. If this legislation passes, I believe the lawyers have not confirmed this yet on either side. They won't comment, but that's likely in jeopardy. So we won't learn who told him to do what, if that's in there, when it came to the Greenbelt, which is a big problem in Ontario and is still under police investigation. That is, unless the police can compel those records down the road.
It's hugely important. I can't say it better than you did. And viewers and listeners in the public in Ontario can make what they want of this, but it's very interesting that this change was announced shortly after the Ford government loses a court case about being ordered to hand over those records to the Information Privacy Commissioner, the cell phone records, so that she can take a look and see what's in there. That's what was happening, right? Jess, they lost that hearing, and then all of a sudden this legislation comes out. Is there any way that you can see that any of this could be amended? I mean, is that when it actually goes through the House for all the different readings, is there anything that could happen where this was changed?
I mean, they can. Mm-hmm. Will they?
Yeah.
They won't. I don't expect them to budge, but they might. Maybe there have been times where the Premier has backed down in the face of political pressure before. The Greenbelt is one of those times. I'm not sure people are beating down his doors about changes to the FOI system, but I wish they would.
Yes.
And it would even be hard. If there was actually anybody in his caucus who would disagreed, it would be one thing to vote against the changes on their own. I think that would still be unlikely, but it's even harder when it's in a budget bill because then you're voting non-confidence in the government itself, and that's not going to happen.
Yeah, and I think if people don't understand, it just means that we're going to know less about what our government is doing, and that's the concern. That's the one sentence version of what's going on here. You're going to know a lot less.
Jess, what's the whole thing around the Speaker's warrant that I heard that the NDP was pursuing?
It was a failed tactic. I don't think it was ever going to succeed. They're the opposition, but they can't command a majority against the government. So they were trying to. They would have needed an order from the legislature itself, from the MPPs, through the speaker, a request to the speaker who would order the production of these records. This has been done in the past in Ontario. There were records, I think, in the air ambulance scandal, I believe, that were compelled that way. The orders could come through a committee to the speaker, but essentially the speaker has these court-like abilities to compel documents and even people and stuff like that. But that's what they were saying they were attempting to do, but I don't think they ever had the power to get it done.
Got it. Well, we're all going to be watching this closely starting early next week as this bill makes its way through. Jess, is there anything else about the budget that we should have touched on that we should have asked you about?
There is a small business corporate income tax cut that will be good news for small business owners. Other than that, it is sort of as expected and all the things that we have touched on in this podcast.
Great. All right, great stuff. As always, from Toronto and from the Trillium, there's Jessica Smith-Cross, our editor-in-chief. Thanks, Jess. Have a terrific weekend.
Thanks, you too.
I know, like you, we've been reading a ton of stuff on yesterday's budget, but now after that, I feel like I get it all.
Nobody explains things better than Jess.
Nobody.
She's the best in the business, and her team is the best in the business.
Yes, they are.
And I take zero credit for what they do. They do their thing, and they're amazing at it. And she just understands all the angles of everything we talked about. I got to tell you, the figure that still sticks out for me is that $485 million overall provincial debt, right?
Yes, yeah.
And there's actually, there's obviously in this day and age, you can find charts very easily that show you where it was 20 years ago and where it is today.
Yeah.
and it's just multiplying.
And the interest.
Right? And the interest.
You brought $16 billion?
Yeah. And I guess, as Jess said, like they feel as long as the economy is doing well and there's revenues coming in that they can afford to pay. But it's like your house. I mean, you can keep earning more and more money, but you've got that kind of interest payment on your mortgage or whatever it is. It's
like making the minimum payment on your credit card.
I'm saying this now. We're going to do an episode next week. I'm going to get a couple experts to come on and talk, because she mentioned there's two arguments, right? There's the one who says, it's not that big of a deal, and the ones who are like, yeah, this is a big deal. We're going to have a discussion about that, because it's no different. Like, if you have 7 mortgages on your house, you're in trouble.
You don't spend more than you're making.
That's right. And I do encourage people. To listen to the part about the FOI changes.
Yes,
this is happening very, very quickly. If you want to voice your concern, reach out to your MPP, reach out to the Premier's office.
Yeah.
Do whatever you can, because this is going to have an impact, and you won't feel it tomorrow, because as we know from the work of the Trillium alone, these requests can sometimes take years. And there are some of the requests that are going to be retroactively killed have been in the works for years, and they're this close to being released, and then all of a sudden they're going to put the axe down on that. I think people need to voice their concerns about this. Anytime in a democracy that a government is less transparent is a bad day.
Agreed. Before we go, how did your Tigers do last night?
Big opening day win, 8-2. This is great. Tarek Skubal, six scoreless innings, but they have a rookie. He's a top number 2 prospect in baseball. Yeah. He worked his way onto the team. He shouldn't have made the team. Made the team. Yeah. Went 4 for 5 last night. His debut on opening day, he got 2 doubles, 2 singles, knocked in 2 runs. Crazy. 21 years old.
Nice.
What are you doing?
What I'm not doing that. That is for sure. All right. Closer look at villagemedia.ca. That's our email address. Reach out anytime. Zach Trunzo at the helm this evening, executive producer of this evening's show. For Michael Friscolanti, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday night at 7 on Closer Look.